Ever been told you weren't a cultural fit? Maybe nobody said it directly. You just felt it. You joined a company, a team, a professional circle, maybe even a friend group. Something was off. It feels completely vague, right? But in this video, I'm going to peel back the corporate buzzwords and show you exactly what's happening beneath the surface. I'm ripping off the mask to show you the hidden mechanics of what cultural fit actually means. People use normal words, but the words don't seem to mean what you thought they meant. Sure, you asked a direct question, but the room kind of treated it like an accusation. You gave an honest answer, and later someone told you your tone was just a little intense. You followed the written process and somehow violated the real one. You show up prepared, but the decision had already happened somewhere else. You made the classic blunder, and not the land war in Asia. I'm talking about thinking that the person with the title was the person with the authority. That feeling is familiar because most of us have been there. And a lot of the time, not fitting in means something more specific than people care to admit. It means you're trying to read the surface while everyone else is operating from hidden rules. When you ask about those rules, everyone looks at you like they don't know what you're talking about. I don't usually do this, but I'm making an exception. If you missed my recent video on small organizations, go check it out. It gives you the exact blueprint of how culture is born and how it evolves. I'm going to do something different in this video. Instead of using a game as an analogy for a concept, I'm gonna use a game as a case study. So I'm going to analyze the cultures of the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Necrons and learn how to analyze your corporate culture along the way. So, if you haven't yet played Mechanicus II or even Mechanicus I, or have never heard of the 40K franchise, that's even better. You do need a basic understanding of the two factions to follow along, so I'll break it down for you here. The Adaptus Mechanicus, operating as a dogmatic, tech worshipping empire, organized themselves across sovereign forge worlds where supreme tech priests command rigid, heavily automated hierarchies dedicated to the absolute efficiency of production and knowledge. The Necrons rise from a millions of years' sleep. This ancient race of metallic androids is divided into strictly feudal tomb dynasties, where royal overlords exert total top down algorithmic control over their mindless, unyielding legions. Clearly, no company is a literal tomb dynasty or a forge world. But we aren't looking for a perfect match. The point is that these two factions take real world management blunders and crank them up to 11. So these exact organizations don't exist in the real world, but they are the perfect exaggerated mirrors for real life companies. In fact, they perfectly capture the unspoken DNA of certain entire industries. Uh, think of the Necrons as a stand in for high stakes industries where absolute top down authority is the law of the land. I'm talking about sectors like firefighting, the military, or even offshore drilling, where immediate obedience is quite literally the difference between life and death. Think of the Adeptus Mechanicus as a stand in for organizations ruled by culture over strategy. In companies like, let's say, Apple or Netflix, workers are given immense trust, but are expected to eat, sleep, and breathe the company culture. If an employee isn't fully bought into the brand philosophy, the system rejects them, just like a tech heretic facing a tech priest. Now, the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Necrons look different, but the important part here is how they make you act inside different systems and the effect it has on the cultures that they create. And that is the question underneath cultural fit. What hidden rule were you expected to know before anyone explained it? So, to apply a more academic lens to this conversation, a useful name to drop here is Edgar Schein. Schein was an MIT Sloan scholar and one of the major figures in organizational culture research. His useful move is separating what you can see from what the group has stopped explaining. Schein looked at culture like a natural scientist would. He asked, what can we actually see? No fluffy bunny stuff, please. Just the cold hard facts. The way I understand it, he saw things at three layers: artifacts, espoused values, and underlying assumptions. So for artifacts, these would be like visible structures, dress codes, technology. Espoused values would be the company's stated goals, philosophies, or even the jargon they use internally. So the underlying assumptions would be things like deep, unconscious, taken for granted beliefs that actually dictate behavior. And I know that last one might seem a bit vague at first glance, but if you stop and look closer, the clues are hidden right in plain sight. Take any corporate value and compare it to what management actually rewards, punishes, or measures during a crisis. That gap between what they say and what they do is where the true culture is revealed. And it doesn't really matter that in the gaming sector, people say that we prioritize well being when crunching is highly valued by management. You know that in the gaming sector, output is valued more than human health. It doesn't matter that in the IT sector, people say that we prioritize trust and safety when everyone is keeping backups of emails and CCing five managers for each tiny decision. You know that in the IT sector, finger pointing is used to deflect client manager programmer accountability pretty much every time in my experience. These are sweeping statements that bear no resemblance to the real world. Of course, any resemblance to any corporation, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Please don't sue me. And once you see this, a lot of workplace weirdness gets less mysterious. Once you accept the inevitability of corporate hypocrisy, can you then start to understand it? If you mistake the artifact for the assumption, your fix can become the problem. So I promised you Necrons and the Adeptus Mechanicus, right? Here we go. The Adeptus Mechanicus have as artifacts all of their technology. They wear individual tech robes, not one alike, have individual augmentations, and can wield weaponry so powerful a standard guardsman would only be able to look at them in awe. What they say is that they're looking for knowledge. To not complicate things, I'm not going to go too deep into the quest for knowledge lore. I'll leave that rabbit hole to you if you're so inclined. For now, it's enough to know that there's a lot of hypocrisy underlying that statement, just like in the real world, which leads us to the underlying assumption. Organic matter is inherently flawed and the machine is divine. We said earlier that the Warhammer world is our world on steroids. A less extreme and more polite version of this would be the underlying assumption that engineering can solve all human suffering. Does that sound familiar? Now, to the other part of the equation. For the Necrons, we also see tech as their artifacts: the monoliths, the Gauss rifles, but also the strict visual hierarchy. The overlords wear extravagant golden crowns and ornate glyphs, while the mindless Necron warriors are stripped of all decoration. They're basically just like metallic skeletons marching in perfect lockstep unison. That should already tell you a lot about the difference between the Necron's extreme hierarchical and de-individualized nature and the extreme individualized nature of the Mechanicus Adeptus. What the Necrons that are allowed to speak say is that they want eternal order to the universe. But what they actually do is wage war and try to grind down everything to their mold, creating more chaos in the process. It would seem like order isn't really the goal. Hierarchical subservience of the universe is the goal, with the underlying assumption that the Necrons know what is best for all. I said earlier that the Warhammer universe is just our world on steroids, and the Necrons prove a brutal point. The only way to get away with absolute top down control in the real world is if you are 100% right every single time. If you are the leader who always has the answer and reality constantly proves you're right, your team will eventually stop thinking. They'll turn into compliance drones, executing your orders to a T, but completely losing the ability to do anything else. In the Warhammer universe, it's safe to say that the rest of the universe seems to disagree. That is the inevitable culture hypocrisy at play. Find the map, find where the map lies to you, and you strike gold. You will always find the culture. Just a heads up, once you see these patterns, you can't unsee them. And you might not always like what you find. Instead of worrying about whether they think you fit their culture, you might find yourself looking around and realizing you don't want to fit in here. Your boos mean nothing. I've seen what makes you cheer. It's a powerful shift, but it can be a little bittersweet to realize a place you wanted to love just isn't right for you. Shine is very powerful and very practical. Before we go deeper and tie it all together, I have another powerful and practical tool for you. Edward Hall. You see, Hall was an anthropologist who studied how cultures communicate through context, silence, space, timing, status, and shared assumptions. You may have heard of his high or low context communication theory, and if not, well, I've got a treat for you. Low context culture is communication that is explicit, literal, and direct. The message is entirely contained in the words spoken. No reading between the lines is required. High context cultures are when communication is deeply nuanced, implicit, and heavily reliant on shared history, underlying relationships, status, and subtext. I think you can see where I'm going with this, right? The Necrons are brutally low context. When a lord issues a command protocol, it is a literal hard coded command. There's no subtext, no hidden meaning, and no emotion. The communication is entirely transactional. The Adeptus Mechanicus is hyper high context. Tech priests communicate in complex binaric cant. Bursts of data, emotional blips, historical data logs, and doctrinal subtext. A human listening to a binaric transmission just hears static, but to the AdMech, a single microsecond burst contains layers of theological reverence, political positioning, and hidden agendas. They constantly look for hidden logic loops and textual heresy in each other's statements. In the real world, it's pretty easy to find out if your company values high context or low context. In high stakes sectors like the military or firefighting, blunt directness saves lives. If that communication style wears on you, try separating the message from the messenger. Shift your mindset from my boss is a jerk to the situation is dangerous. It's not personal, it's the reality of the job. In low stakes but high context cultures like Apple or Netflix, reading between the lines is a survival skill. Success relies on deep cultural alignment and navigating intense feedback loops. If this style feels exhausting, stop thinking these people are playing mind games and start realizing we are aligning on a shared vision. It's not a trap, it's just how creative ecosystems collaborate. This may even help you understand why tech heretics are so problematic for the Mechanicus, or how there are so many small differences within the Mechanicus that are tech heresy in some ages, while not in others. For them, a unified shared vision isn't just a corporate alignment goal, it's a matter of life or death for the entire faction, and they know it. There is a disclaimer I'd like to make at this time about Hall, but his lesson applies to Schein and Hofstede to a lesser extent. Peter Carden, a business communication scholar, reviewed the literature on Hall's contexting model and found that it is widely used, but there is no rigorous empirical research, quantitative data, or controlled studies. In short, his argument can be boiled down to Hall did qualitative research, not quantitative. What I'm not going to do is get into the debate between qualitative research versus quantitative research and whether the critique of Cardon is a good faith critique. I bring it up because it illustrates something very important. I should state very clearly here that you should not use Schein, Hall, or later Hofstede on an individual level. For the Hall example, individuals are usually very capable of switching between high context and low context. When motivated, a software engineer from a traditionally high context background can write flawlessly explicit low context code or documentation when the project demands it. Culture is a resource people strategically deploy, not an automated script they're forced to run in. It's not set in stone, it's just the group's default setting. Now that we have that out of the way, let's look at the last lens we're going to use to check out the Necrons and AdMech today. Hofstede. Hofstede's cultural dimensions give people a language to talk about workplace culture. He's incredibly valuable, but as you'll see, truly decoding an organization at this depth takes time. Hofstede sees 6 dimensions that can explain a culture: power or distance, uncertainty avoidance, individual and collectivism, time horizon, restraint, and masculinity. I'll go through them one by one and use them as a lens to look at both the AdMech and the Necrons with each dimension. This is just my perspective. Feel free to discuss it in the comments if you think I got it wrong. First is power distance. Power distance measures the extent to which less powerful members of a society expect and accept an unequal distribution of power. For the Necrons, this is relatively easy. The nobles have absolute command, lower tiers have zero autonomy or right to question authority. So the Necrons have a maximal power distance. For the AdMech, it's clear that it isn't as rigid as the Necrons. Tech priests bicker constantly and use logic protocols to debate their superiors. The fact that they are allowed to do that means that they are probably on the moderate side. Superiors still exist, not everything is voted on democratically, but you are allowed to voice your opinions and state your case. Second is uncertainty avoidance, which basically means you're measuring the degree to which members of a society feel threatened by ambiguity and the unknown, typically relying on strict rules, regulations, and rituals to minimize anxiety. The difference between the two factions here is stark. The Necrons hate uncertainty. They want a stagnant, eternal universe where everything is mapped, categorized, and static. The AdMech could not be more different. They willingly dive into dangerous, unknown alien tombs to salvage lost data, actively tolerating massive systemic risk for a payoff. Third is individualism. Individualism measures the degree of interdependence a society maintains among its members. At first glance, we would think this follows the same pattern as the uncertainty avoidance dimension, but it has a little more nuance. When it comes to the Necrons, Hofstede actually had an interesting warning that makes a lot of sense if you look at the Necrons. Hofstede warned that culture changes depending on the level you study. National culture, occupational culture, subcultures, and organizational culture are not the same thing. This is exemplified in the Necrons, where the overlords retain hyperinflated egos, deep personal rivalries, and an obsession with their personal legacy. They are the ultimate I driven executives. On the other hand, the working class citizens had their minds deleted during biotransference. They function purely as a distributed hardware network. They have a collective identity of zero. The AdMech at first seem hyper individualistic, even if they operate as groups. They see this as an inherent flaw and want to become part of the data stream. This means merging your consciousness with the Omnissiah's collective knowledge base. The Omnissiah is their mythical machine, god, spirit. So even though they would score high if you look at the day to day, what they strive for is a deletion of that individualism. Fourth is time horizon. A time horizon describes how a culture balances its own history with the challenges of the present and the future. Despite being in the far future, the AdMech is fiercely short term and dogmatic in their thinking. They don't really innovate for the future, they scavenge the past. It's never forward looking, always to the past. The Necrons, on the other hand, slept for 60 million years just to outlast their rivals. Their time horizons are calculated in geological epochs. An overlord doesn't care if a strategy takes 3 centuries to yield results. They possess the ultimate infinite horizon mindset. Fifth is indulgent versus restraint. This dimension measures the degree to which a society allows relatively free gratification of basic and natural human desires related to enjoying life and having fun. Here, both sides resemble each other the most, be it for different reasons. The AdMech actively prunes away the capacity for indulgence. To rise through the ranks, you must undergo the crux mechanicus, replacing your emotional, biological organs with cold, unfeeling steel and synthetic pistons. Pleasures of the flesh are viewed as a computational noise. The Necrons are trapped in the most horrific form of restraint possible: physical limitation. They want to indulge. The nobles desperately crave the taste of wine, the warmth of the sun, and the thrill of sensory joy. But their metal bodies lack the biological receptors to feel anything. Their restraint is total, absolute, and deeply bitter, driving many of them completely insane. Sixth and last, masculinity. Masculinity measures the degree to which a society is driven by competition, achievement, and material success, as opposed to prioritizing cooperation, quality of life, and caring for others. The Necrons and Admechs are exactly identical here. Sure, we can nitpick and say the Necrons are behaviorally masculine, ego driven, status, dominance, and conquest, and the Admech are systematically masculine, strictly focused on productive outcome, hitting your targets, and efficiency being king. But in the end, both care nothing about empathy, work life balance, or caring for the weak and infirm. I and my colleague have done it on the last 7 organizations we've been a part of, and interestingly, in our experience, there was always a difference between the higher levels of the organization and the lower levels. That can be selection bias, so, take that with a grain of salt. My advice on using Hofstede like it to evaluate an organization is to use it on yourself first. Think about yourself and be honest, because, we're all so good at that. Am I the kind of person who's really okay with a big power distance? Am I the kind of guy that just loves following orders and not to have any responsibility whatsoever? Or am I the kind of guy that loves to give orders and take the blame when the chips are down? Do I love taking risks and big swings? Or am I more a calculated risk guy? Or do I hate and despise risk and wish everything goes exactly the way I want it to go always? Am I a teamwork makes the dream work kind of guy? Or do I love individual bonuses? Do I always think of the future and how to get there? Or am I more of a chill vibes, go with the flow kind of guy? Do I want rewards immediately or can I wait for a higher payoff? Or do I value status, winning, and success, or caring for others in a nice work life balance? Once you know all these things about yourself, it'll be easier to spot where the mismatch is between you and the organization. Trust me, they'll call you out immediately. That will also inform you where you are a good match with your company, because that is something you will not see. Just ballpark it in the beginning, and once you've answered these questions about yourself, it will be hard for you not to ballpark it immediately, whether you want to or not. And that saves you a lot of problems. I've seen so many people leave a job only to realize that the culture they were in was amazing for them. They just couldn't see it until they were somewhere else. Or an organizational change that made the company culture completely different and they didn't see it and they just stayed because the times were so good back then. In the end, ballparking will already yield spectacular results. But if you want to take it to the next level, you can put your first benchmarks down and adjust as you are longer with the organization. You can also start seeing where the different cultures in your company are. Upper management tends to have a different culture than on the work floor. That one is easy to spot. But in big companies, finance, HR, and marketing can look like they are from different planets culturally. Whether you ballpark it or do a deep dive, you'll see the organization on a deeper level than many will. Add a little sheen, a little haul, and you'll truly rip the mask off. Then you'll see the organization for what it is rather than what it wants to portray itself as. And that really gets us full circle here. I started this video with the explicit promise to rip off the mask to show you the hidden mechanics of what cultural fit actually means. Hopefully, looking through the lenses of Schein, Hall, and Hofstedt, we didn't just decode that vague culture fit feeling, but gave you a blueprint of the future. I'm breaking down those next steps in our upcoming videos. They're on our internal roadmap, so make sure to subscribe and stay tuned. I want to take the time to thank the Warhammer subreddit and the Discord where we discuss these topics before they go live. If you found any value in this video, I really hope you'll take a moment and press the like button, the share button, and even subscribe if you're so inclined. And if you really want to help the channel, click on one of these videos. We'll see you next week with new insights and games here on Tactical Mindscapes. Thanks for watching.